Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the July edition of the Newburyport Documentary Film Festival's Watch Club. I am James Sullivan, the program director of the festival. We're getting excited to run our 18th annual festival live in person in September. So keep an eye out for our announcement, which is imminent, about which films we're going to be bringing in. But in the meantime, we're very excited today to have the co-directors of an incredibly powerful new documentary that I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, and hopefully many of you have had an opportunity to see at this point, HBO's The Janes, about the women based in Chicago 50 years ago, just before the passage of Roe v. Wade, who helped something like 10,000 women find a way to get an abortion when they needed one over the late 60s and early 70s. Lessin and Emma Pildes are the co-directors, and they will be with us just momentarily. But first, we'd like to run the trailer for The Janes for those of you who maybe either haven't had a chance to see the film yet or just want to refresh your memories.
We were ordinary women trying to save women's lives, but
we were criminals. We were felons. For most of the nation in 72, abortion was illegal.
We had to go underground.
The woman would be given the address to the front.
It was probably obvious to neighbors what was going on.
We came to the surface from other things, the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement.
You couldn't not pay attention to what was going on.
Fetal death is murder.
You could not work as a pregnant woman. If you weren't married, you were out of luck.
They were terrible situations.
The septic abortion word was full every day.
Women did awful things.
They were literally dying because they were women.
So we thought we can be of use. I said, we could use my phone, but change it so that they don't ask for Eleanor. How about Jane? Nobody's called Jane anymore.
We had the phone numbers on bulletin boards around Chicago. Pregnant, call Jane.
The clientele included daughters, wives, mistresses of police, state's attorney, judges.
It dawned on me how big an issue this was.
Jane was an outrageous undertaking by a lot of smart women.
I was not there to pass judgment.
I knew there were women like me.
Under the radar of the Chicago Mafia and police department.
We were all being watched.
The phone rings. A man says, we know where you are.
There were 11 counts of conspiracy to commit abortion, 110 years for each of us. So that's a long time.
That might have ended Jane right then and there.
I couldn't see myself sitting on the sidelines.
We were building a new world, one woman at a time.
Sometimes you have to stand up to illegitimate authority, and sometimes they're unjust laws that need to be challenged.
Lessin and Emma Pildes, welcome to the Watch Club. We're really excited to have you here to speak about your film. I just want to say briefly at the beginning, I just want to give a little bit of background for the two of you. Tia, you are were the director of Trouble the Water, right? And which was nominated for an Academy Award, 2007, 2008, I think, right?
2009 Academy Awards.
2009, and you've also done a lot of producing for Michael Moore, right? Among many other things. You guys both have great resumes as filmmakers, so I just wanted to take care of that right at the top and congratulate you for getting to this point and then making this amazing film. And then Emma, you have worked for years as a producer, right, with American Masters and HBO on all kinds of specials. But this is actually your first directing gig. Yeah. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
So, you know, all I can say about your film is wow. You know, lots of people have said a lot of stuff about it. Obviously, it's incredibly timely, extremely well made. And I just want to hear from you, and I'm sure our audience does too, about how the film came to be. So I'm going to ask you some really simple, basic, first questions. How did you two meet? How did you get to, how did this film come about? Did you already know each other, or did you was the film the reason that you met in the first place?
Tia, why don't you take Oh, it? sure. I early on in my career had worked with Jessica Levin, who is one of the producers of this film and a longtime producing partner of Emma's. And so it's through that association that that Emma and I met and got to know each other a little bit socially. And she approached me about working with her on this film, and I was all in.
Oh, so then that sounds to me like maybe Emma, it was your idea, or you were no.
No, it was. I approached Tia. I have a family connection to the story.
Okay.
So,
care to elaborate, or would you prefer?
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. So Daniel Arcana, who is another one of the producers on the film and a wonderful producer in his own right, also happens to be my brother. Oh. And Daniel's mom, Daniel's my half brother. So Daniel's mom and my dad were married. And Daniel's mom is Judith, one of the Janes.
Yep.
And our father actually is the radical lawyer in the film. So like any good, documentary filmmaker, we went to our own backyard and did, got everything we could out of it to make a film and capitalized on our own family history.
Right.
So it's a big subject, and it was clear how timely it was when Trump got into office and started packing the courts and all of that, and that it was getting more and more relevant by the day. And I just thought it would be a great thing to team up with Tia on. I had long admired her as a filmmaker and as an activist, and it was a mouthful of a story. So I didn't mind the company in directing this. So boy did it work out.
Just from a sort of nuts and bolts perspective on making the film, a mouthful of a story is right. You guys have whatever the number is, 12, 14, consistent talking heads through this thing.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many documentaries I've looked at over the years with our film festival where it's all talking heads and it's relentless. You did such a fantastic job just in terms of like taking care of the viewer, so that it's not just like sort of one person after another. I mean, out of necessity, you need all those folks to tell their version of the story. Mm-hmm. But the archival stuff is unbelievable. And just when we think that the 60s and early 70s are tapped out in terms of good storytelling or rehashing, the Vietnam / civil rights / women's movement era.
Or archive, for that matter.
Exactly. Yeah, but you obviously dug directly into Chicago film archives to really place it, place the film where it happened, right? So that part of it is amazing, and I as a viewer really appreciate that fact that you took care of us, so that it wasn't just a lot of talking and no real context or putting it into the time frame.
Well, that was so important because these women didn't just come, it magically appear. They each had, and there were almost 24 interviews, but they each had their own backstories. They had their own personal experiences, and they were all coming of age in this era. Some of them were a little older, and so they were coming of age in the civil rights era. Some of them on the younger side in their 19s and 20s. In 68, were coming of age in the anti-war movement and later the women's movement. And this informed, their principles, their values, and also their tactics. They were all about action, and they believed in, being operational, really, and making things happen. And unfortunately, in those movements, the student movement, the anti-war movement primarily, they were relegated to a diminished role because they were women. And so they, on their own, served up this amazing, organized, resourceful network that, in these other movements, they weren't allowed to express themselves that way or take leadership in that way. So it was a really a personal blossoming for them, as people and as activists.
Right.
And we wanted to show that, and thankfully we had this extraordinary archive of that era because, as you can imagine, they weren't filming themselves doing illegal activities in that moment.
Let me take a moment to mention to our viewers who are here with us live, if any of you would like to ask a question of either or both of the filmmakers, all you need to do is type your question into the chat on YouTube, and our very reliable producer, Steve, will take care of the questions and feed them over to me so I can ask them of Emma and Tia if you're interested in doing that. So go ahead and fire away. But in the meantime, let's just talk. So the Laura Kaplan book, when did that come out? The book that is also called The Janes, I think, right?
Yeah, I don't know what the date is on that. In the 90s, is that right? Yeah,
I think so.
I think so. I'm not certain on that.
Do either of you know at the time, was that sort of like a revelation? Like people were like, oh my God, nobody's heard this story before. Because, that's my reaction to your film, and so many other viewers. Oh my God, I've never heard this story before. Right. But people probably knew about it when Laura's book came out.
Yeah. I mean, there's been some things that have come out about it. There was another documentary, a PBS documentary that came out in the 90s about it. There's been some long form magazine pieces. There's Laura's wonderful book, which is really special, of course, because she was part of the service and so had access. So there's been stuff, but it is somehow a story that a lot of people don't know. I don't know if that's indicative of women's history not, being as widely known or recognized on a higher level in this country. I'm not sure. That was certainly a point of pride for Tia and I to be able to tell sort of a heroic women's story. That was definitely part of the appeal for us.
Sure.
So, but some people know it and some people don't, which is kind of fun for us because, it's fun to tell a new story. It feels like such a revelation for a lot of people.
Of course.
And so many people are in disbelief that they hadn't heard it before.
Right. Was there an issue getting any of the women to talk, or Mike, for that matter, the doctor, for those of you who have seen the film? I mean, he seems like he was probably a project to figure out where he was and whether he would talk to you, I would imagine, right?
Project.
They were all engaged in very highly illegal activities. When they were finally busted, they were, if they had been fully prosecuted, they were facing 115 years in prison each. And so, those names were out, those 7 women, that were busted, but there was a whole network behind them that hadn't been outed, and they had gone on with their lives. And so mainly, because they'd gone on with their lives to do great things and raise families and create art, they didn't necessarily see a reason to go back. And I think we just happened to approach them at a moment that, was a watershed moment for abortion rights in this country. And they saw the writing on the wall, as did we. And they understood the importance of their voices and the power of the story at this critical moment and in the crossroads. And so they were, they needed a little coaxing, some of them, but we got a critical mass. And they, were happy to tell their story. But look, they're also women who don't tend to self-promote. Right. Their egos are, they were all about the work, and so none of them wanted to say me, and so it was important to them and to us that we had this chorus of voices telling the story. So it was really a collective of voices. It wasn't organizationally a collective, but it was a group of people doing this extraordinary thing that was greater than the sum of its parts.
Speaking on behalf of men, isn't that just sort of a male-female thing? I mean, like, if it had been a bunch of men doing some similar thing, we'd probably all would have heard about it ad nauseum by now, right?
Well, we've talked about that a lot, Tia
Yeah.
and I. I mean, this story is a hero's journey in its way, but in such a different way, in such a female way, in such a working together for the greater good without the spotlight in the doing and in the telling. This was I think, to Tia's point of what she was just saying, I think the reason they were willing to do this was they sort of saw this as a second call to action, a second call to duty, to sit down for our cameras and tell the story, because as Tia said, the writing was on the wall and they knew that it was a meaningful contribution to what lied ahead. So, through all of that, yeah, I think it's a for better and for worse. I don't know, that women don't take credit in the same way, perhaps, as men do.
Right. So we have a good audience question that I want to get to in a moment, but she's talking about the present day after effects of what's recently happened, which obviously we're going to get to. I want to just ask one more thing, which it pertains to Boston in a way. I think it's only mentioned once briefly in the film, but the Our Bodies Ourselves book. Is it Marie, I think, the African-American woman who was part of the group? What's her name?
No, it was Crystal who brought her. She's a Black woman who brought her friend to have an abortion.
Oh, right. Yeah. And she said, go ahead.
She said that that there was a copy of Our Bodies Ourselves there, and they did that. They ordered boxes of that book, the women of this collective, of this abortion services collective, and they handed out Our Bodies Ourselves to everybody that came through their door.
That's almost that book is almost like a parallel story to the Janes. The formation of that book and the women who got together in Cambridge, Mass, in the early 70s to say, nobody's telling us some of this stuff, and so we'll figure it out on our own. And that book went from, like sort of a stapled pamphlet to a huge, continually reprinted. I mean, that story has always fascinated me, and it's just a parallel story. So I was happy to see a copy of the book show up at a certain point during the film.
Yeah, I mean, that was very meaningful to them to include that in the, in their services. It wasn't. It was a top to tails operation. They were really trying to empower women in their own lives, in a lot of different ways, servicing abortions, but also giving them information about their own bodies, which was something that was so lacking, and and transparency about the medical procedure. I mean, all these things that we sort of take for granted now.
Right. So our viewer Sharon has this question, and I'm going to try to rephrase it a little bit. Well, with the changes in technology and surveillance and the overturning of Roe v. Wade, do you think this type of support of women who need abortions in states where it's now illegal will repeat itself? So I think the technology and surveillance part is tripped me up for a moment. But go ahead and answer if you can.
Well, it is repeating itself. I mean, there are people in Texas right now and many other states. There's a total ban on abortions now in Texas, and they're traveling to Colorado and New Mexico and California for abortion care. And that's happening all over the country, and there are organized networks of people helping to create support around the logistics of travel, defraying the medical expenses. There are legal defense funds popping up to create a cash reserve in case of prosecutions of doctors and the patients. So it is happening. There's extraordinarily resourceful people going to Mexico. There are folks that are helping to distribute the medication abortion pill, because half of all abortions are done medically. Right. But the surveillance is an issue, because while people can make connections to abortion care much more easily, in 2022, their internet searches can also much more easily, traced, and geolocating cell phone data and cross-referencing that location with your abortion care searches, can yield a lot for a prosecutor who's interested in casting a wide net. So I think there are ways to be a little stealthy, and there are some groups that are looking into that. But there are groups in every state, not only the states where abortion is now banned, but states where abortion is legal, that are what we're calling, safe haven states like Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm. I think I just saw in the news that, well, I don't know if it was just somewhere in the news. The piece of advice, speaking directly to Sharon's question, I think, is that if you're someone who is seeking an abortion, use a burner phone, right? You don't use your own phone. Use a phone that you're going to throw out after the fact, so that you can't get traced. It's so distressing that
for healthcare.
Right, for health.
Basic healthcare.
Right.
We have to use phones.
We also have to remember that the abortion pill and abortion as a procedure is not just used to terminate unwanted pregnancies, it's also used for miscarriage care, miscarriage management. So people with wanted pregnancies who have complications, who have a miscarriage, often need the follow-up of a DNC or a DNE or a medication, and they won't be able to get that. And doctors in Texas right now are refusing care to people who need that care, and that is really dangerous.
So the two of you, said that when you first started this project, maybe 4 years ago or so, something like that ish, right?
Mm-hmm.
Could tell that the issue was becoming relevant, sadly, all over again. The last guy was packing the court. They were clearly headed in this direction. However, the day that the ruling came down, what was it? I can't remember now. 6 weeks ago, maybe, or something like that.
A lifetime ago. It was
right.
I mean, it feels like a lifetime ago, but yeah, just a few weeks ago.
Can you recall how you felt that morning, even though you sort of knew this day was becoming more and more inevitable? How did the two of you feel?
Yeah,
that
well,
morning?
we had the leak, right? So we really sort of knew what was coming even more. So I wouldn't speak for Tia, but I bet she would agree that the leak was almost more emotionally effective, because it was the first time we were seeing it really there in print, and everybody had their emotional reaction to it. I think for Tia and I, we had been so steeped in this material and so hyper aware of what this means and what it looked like last time. And I mean, we spent the last couple of years, as you said, looking at, death certificates of women that died because they had to get a back alley abortion or self-induced. So I think, for me, I just felt sort of overwhelmed and flooded with everything I knew would likely be the case, immediately. And has been happening for a while now. 90% of the counties in the United States don't have access to abortion care. So that's a lot of women, disproportionately, Black and brown communities and underserved communities, poor communities, rural communities, indigenous communities that don't have access to abortion, and women that are severely suffering because of it. So, yeah, it was quite upsetting and quite overwhelming.
Is there any way to think that the timing of your film is, absurdly on the money, right? Is there any way to think that the film itself can make any kind of a difference? That, it's teaching some folks who thought they thought one way, like Tia, what you just said about the healthcare aspect, right? It's not just women who, decide I don't want this baby, are you experiencing any of that? I'm sure you're hearing from viewers who are thanking you for the film.
Well, that's why we do this work. That's why we're storytellers. Speaking for myself, I think that, films can make change.
Mm-hmm.
They certainly can engage people in conversation and help people see, a different side of the story. What we tried to do with the Janes is paint a picture of what this country looked like before Roe v. Wade, at a time when abortion was illegal in most of the country, and people had to turn to all sorts of underground networks to get basic health care. And, the Janes were one of many operations out there. The tricky part of it for me is that, so many of the laws right now are far more sinister, far more prohibitive, far more punitive than anything that existed before Roe. So, as much as we thought this might be a cautionary tale, I think it's just a preview. There is more to come. And, this decision is so far reaching. Unfortunately, I think this film is going to be, resonating in the many months and years to come. And we wish it weren't so. We wish we had been telling a story relegated to the history books that would, stay as part of our past. But in fact, it's our present, not just our future. But we hope that audiences will leave the film getting engaged. And there are resources on our website. If you've seen the film and you want to connect, please go to the HBO Janes website and tap into those organizations.
We can post about that too after the fact to point people towards the film. I'll just say one more time, if anybody who's watching live wants to ask a question, sneak it in under the wire. We got a couple minutes left. So go ahead and post something if you want to. Thanks for your question, Sharon. I want to point out a couple of moments in the film. Now, actually, what I want to do before I do that is just ask more broadly, Tia, based on something that you just said. It's why you do the work. You produced for several Michael Moore films. Obviously, a bunch of his films have been about issues that have sort of helped push the dialogue along, whether it's about gun control or the healthcare system or big business. Clearly that's what he does. And, one of the reasons why I love working with this festival and working with filmmakers like yourselves and presenting your films is exactly that reason. I mean, not every documentary is a hard-hitting piece of social commentary, but when that's needed, as in the case of the Janes, there's few aspects of our popular culture that work better in terms of helping to steer the dialogue. Al Gore, Inconvenient Truth, right? I mean, that was kind of like a lot of people's first, oh, really? The planet's, gonna burn up on us, thanks to Al Gore for telling us, So would either of you like to kind of take a shot at just sort of talking more broadly about why the work of documentary filmmaking is so important and has been, especially so for the last 25 years or so, in terms of the cultural, our discourse.
Well, I just want to say also, it's part of the reason that I wanted so much to work with Tia is, though Michael's films are incredible, we all know that, but is because of Trouble the Water and Citizen Code. Tia makes, I don't know, Tia, if you feel comfortable with me saying activist films, but films that are socially driven. I think she does a beautiful job doing that. I just want to say that apart from Michael's films, that is really the heart and soul of the films that Tia makes, and her ability to understand the issue and unpack the issue. I think for herself, we all benefit from that. So just to say that. And then, for me, these aren't traditionally the films that I've worked on. I've done a lot of work with Susan Lacey, producing for Susan Lacey, who started American Masters and is a legend in the industry. And we made profile pieces. A lot of those had social issues woven into them, like the Jane Fonda film we made for HBO. So, I would just say that from a filmmaker, if you have the privilege and honor of being able to do this, it's just so it's so helpful in understanding the world and studying people that have devoted their lives to certain things, and whether it be Jane Fonda or the Janes. People that have done these extraordinary things in the world that you want to share and expand on and expound on, and so it's just incredibly meaningful to me. And I think T and I have really were able to come together on that to make this film. It was quite special, a sisterhood, with Tia and I and Kristen Huntley, our extraordinary editor, to make a film about sisterhood. So,
Tia, do you want
meaningful work?
Tia, do you want to expand on that in any way, or thank Emma for the nice pat on the back?
Well,
I just want to make sure that was said. Those are important, beautiful films that mean a lot to me.
Yeah.
No, and I'll say this, that we, as much as this is a call to action, it was really important to me and to Emma to make this an engaging film and to make this a story, because that is really the heart of great filmmaking, is engaging people, in people's lives and telling a story. And there's such dramatic, it's not only a timely film, it's not only an issue-driven film, it's a story-driven film. And these women's lives are so layered and so complicated and so interesting. And, so I think if you haven't seen the film, you're going to be surprised to see an abortion film that'll make you laugh, that will, hopefully in some ways feel like a caper film. And, we're not wagging the finger. This is not sort of a traditional take your medicine documentary. This is really a glimpse into the past and told through the voices of people who lived it.
Right. Yeah. So now I do want to kind of wrap up by just mentioning, I want you to respond, if you don't mind, to a couple of the things that were said in the film. One is it's alluded to in the trailer where the Jane named Eleanor, it was her place where the people were calling, right? In the trailer, she says, it wasn't my place to judge, or whatever the line is. But what she said prior to that in the film was their reason for wanting the abortion was their reason. And that to me was, and then she says, it wasn't my place to judge. It was just, you think you need one, we're here to help. So that was incredibly moving. And then the other thing,
I'm so glad that was moving to you. It's so moving
absolutely.
to us. It was such an important ethos to us.
Yes. Yeah, it kind of underlined the whole thing for me. Yeah. And then the other thing is that right at the end, and I can't remember the woman's name, the Jane's name, who says this, but she says, basically when she's talking about when, the original Roe v. Wade ruling came down, and she said, hallelujah, hallelujah. Right. And it's just so distressing that all these women, to be my immediate thought was all these women are still here to be experiencing what we're all experiencing in terms of the recent ruling. So, not a question, obviously, just sort of more, I'm looking for your reactions to either of those things.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the latter. We had the experience of watching this film with festival audiences before the leak and after.
Yeah.
And it was a profound difference in the room.
Yep.
In our hearts, in our heads, and in the room. It's so upsetting. The ending just hits in such a different way. It was very important to us that, we made the filmmaking, from a filmmaking perspective, we decided to make this, an encapsulated story, that we were just going to tell this story, that we weren't going to bring it into the future, even with all the things that were going on, because there'd be all kinds of other things that were going on 10 years ago, so we wanted and knew that the lightning in the bottle was this story and the power of these women in this moment. And that audiences are smart enough to be able to connect the dots and understand, and have that play in the moment they're in the world. And boy, does it when we watch this, and it's quite emotional and quite upsetting, and quite emotional and upsetting, of course, to the Janes, who, as you say, went on this roller coaster ride. They already put themselves on the line, literally put their own freedom on the line, to save women's lives, because our government was failing to do that and showing how little they valued women. And then they thought that it was off their shoulders and that it wasn't their responsibility anymore, and that they could go on with their lives, and that was something that was taken care of. And now it's being ripped away again. And they know what that means, and they know the suffering, and they know the clipped wings that's going to mean. And it's very, I think it's, they're hopeful people, and they're women that, get shit done. Excuse my, pardon my language, but it's pretty grim. It's pretty grim.
So. No, it's a crisis. We are in a crisis right now. 26 states, a large swath of this country, are going to be absolutely inhospitable to women seeking basic health care. And people will have to drive long distances, if they can afford it, take a plane or a bus. And for, what, 2 weeks ago was perfectly legal. And it's going to affect all of us. And if you think that's it, you got another thing coming. I mean, they are going after birth control. They're going after IVF. They're going after marriage equality. This is just the beginning. And they have set their sights on this for 50 years. And they got it. And I think I think what we've learned is that when they say it out loud, that this is what they want, to ban abortion completely, that's what we can expect. And I guarantee you, if the House and Senate flip, we are going to see a federal ban on abortion in the next session.
And Tia, you said this is, something that affects all of us. And by all of us, you do mean, for anyone who still thinks this is a women's issue, forget about it. It's about men. It's about families, it's about everyone. And it's a little, it's more than a little disturbing, but let's try to end on at least now, this session on a higher note, right?
Hasn't been easy lately, but yes.
I know. Anyway, thank you so much for taking the time to join.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you both speaking with us. And again, thank you for making such a extremely well-made documentary. We'll try to do our best to get as many people as possible to watch it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And, we look forward to hopefully speaking with you, maybe about a lighter subject, whatever you're working on next. Next time,
like a romantic comedy, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. Steve, if you want to run I just want to say, if anyone is interested in catching the next Watch Club or any of our filmmaker interviews, we've just had one great one after another, including tonight. So, just go to our YouTube page and click the subscribe button, and you won't miss any information about when our next interview will be. And I would just like to take a moment to thank once again Tia and Emma for joining us, and to thank the sponsors of the Newburyport Documentary Film Festival as always. And we'll see you next month in the Watch Club.